Hi, my name is Angelica Vecca, and I'm here to talk to you today about racism. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about, typical run-of-the-mill racism like racial slurs or bigotry, open discrimination, ethnocentrism, or the seemingly harmless racist joke. I think we're all pretty good at identifying those and recognizing them as racism. What I'd like to talk to you today about is a type of racism that's much harder to identify. And this type of racism is called colorblind racism. Now, the problem with colorblind racism is that it tends to be invisible. And what it does is it actually erases or tries to erase questions of race inequality and difference. And at the same time that it erases race inequality and difference, which is something that we kind of identify with as people, as individuals. At the same time it does that, it actually focuses in on the individual, blaming the individual, rather than looking at society and seeing what's going on in society. So when I say that it focuses more on the individual and it doesn't question society, I'm talking about stuff like privilege. So, you'll hear people say a lot, I did it, so can they. Or, I struggled too, but I made it, so they should stop complaining. And while each of us, is justified in feeling that we worked hard for what we have. I mean, most of us are justified in feeling that we worked hard for what we have. It's also important to remember that a lot of us, whether we feel that we received it or whether we feel that we have it or not, a lot of us do have privilege. Now, I'm not talking about, massive amounts of wealth and, really obvious privilege, such as being born into, an extremely wealthy family, in, Harvard legacy family. I'm talking about even smaller, less noticeable types of privilege, such as the difference between being born in a slightly nicer neighborhood or being born, quote unquote, on the other side of the tracks. Because when we're born, we don't choose our family. And we have absolutely no control where our family is living at the time of our birth. And we, as babies, we do not contribute to the household. We have no control over how much money our parents make, what their jobs are, or what they're able to provide for us and our family. So it really is a privilege to be born into a family that has the ability and has the means to live in a nicer area, nicer part of town. Maybe because they live in a nicer area, they're able to send you to a better school system, which, will help you to get a better education. Maybe because you're in a better school system and you have better teachers, or you have smaller classrooms, maybe you learn better, or maybe you feel more inspired and more, comfortable in a learning environment, which makes you feel and believe that you can go on to a university level, to do university level studies. Maybe because of your educational background, you get that internship in that company, and because you got the internship at that company, maybe you're hired into that company, and then maybe because you're hired into that company, you're able to move up the ranks and eventually become, the president or the CEO or a high-ranking executive of that company. And so when you look back, you say, I worked very hard for everything that I have, and that's not false. That's true. You did work hard for what you have. But you also have to take into account that you were born into a situation. You had no control, you had no choice, but you were born into a situation where your parents, were living in a nicer area. They were able to send you to a nicer schools, and that's a privilege. That's a privilege that you had, that put you on the track to work hard, to get to where you are today. And so it's very important to remember that while, yes, most of us do work hard for what we have and the success and the valuable things that we own and that we have, they are results of our hard work. But a lot of it is also a result of the privilege that we have. We can also, I'd also like to touch on the topic with colorblind racism also tends to sort of erase this idea of social and financial inheritances. So I think we all understand what a financial inheritance is. That's along the lines of, God forbid, your parents or your grandparents pass away, and in their will they leave you a property or a house or a sum of money. So that's wealth. I mean, it may or may not be monetary wealth, but that's wealth that you're receiving that you haven't necessarily worked for or earned or, got on your own merit. Your parents worked for it, or your grandparents worked for it, or your great-grandparents worked for it, but you're now getting it for free. I mean, obviously under heartbreaking circumstances, but you're getting it for free. And that's wealth that you're receiving for free that somebody else whose parents weren't able to save, because they worked a job and they lived hand to mouth and they weren't able to save, or they weren't able to purchase property or extra property. That's wealth that they're never going to receive, or that they're unable to receive. And that's financial wealth, and that's financial wealth that you are receiving for free. Then we talk about social wealth is a little bit trickier. It's not as obvious as financial wealth. Social wealth would be something along the lines of, your father knows a high-ranking executive at a company, and so when you need a job or an internship, your father is able to introduce you to that person and sort of put in a good word with that person, and that may, and that helps you get the job or get the internship or the position or whatever it is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your father. It could be your mother. It could be that, it could be one of your professors at your university that you wouldn't have met if you hadn't gone to that university, and you wouldn't have gone to that university if you couldn't pay for it. You see where I'm going with this? So that would be an example of social wealth. And as I said before, not everyone has access to these resources of social wealth. I mean, not everyone's father knows a high-ranking executive at a company, or not everyone's parents can put in a good word, or grandparents can put in a good word for that person. Not everyone can go to the really nice college and get the really great, college, recommendation from their college professor. I mean, these are social inheritances that not everyone has access to. So that's another thing that's what's so tricky about colorblind racism is colorblind racism sort of strives to take all of this off the table. It sort of doesn't want to talk about privilege. It doesn't even want to acknowledge privilege. Colorblind racism doesn't want to acknowledge social and financial inheritances. And colorblind racism doesn't want to acknowledge self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, if you're told from when you're very young, and maybe directly or maybe indirectly, maybe it's just from watching TV and listening to music and watching the news, and you're told from when you're a baby, from when you're a toddler, that you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough, you're not important enough, you're not going to succeed. At a certain point, you start to believe it. And, I think we can all identify with that feeling or that question of, am I good enough? And for the majority of us, that's sort of a fleeting, it's a fleeting feeling, it's a fleeting question. But for a lot of people, that's a question that they have to live with every day, because every day since they were children, they were told, directly or indirectly, that they were not good enough, that they were not worthy, they were not smart enough, and they were not going to succeed. And at a certain point, you come to believe that. And once that happens, it's sort of hard to break out of the cycle. So when we're talking about colorblind racism, it sort of wants to kind of, it doesn't want to talk about any of these issues. It doesn't even want to acknowledge any of those issues that play into success. And you get you sort of hear a lot of, I struggle too, or there are plenty of opportunities. You just have to get them. This idea that everyone is sort of on the same playing field and everyone has the same opportunities, and it's just a matter of whether or not you choose to take them. And as I've previously stated, this is not the case. Not everyone is born in the same neighborhood with the same access to resources, school systems, books, good food, healthcare. I mean, we're talking about basic human needs, and these that should be equal across the board, but they're not. So when you hear people say, "Oh, there's plenty of opportunity," they're just being lazy. It's completely erasing the entire. It's completely erasing the entire conversation, and it's making it makes it very hard to sort of move forward from that. Because you're really focusing, and what you're really saying is that there's nothing wrong with the system. The system, the way it is fine. What's wrong are the individuals. And that's not really a fair thing to say. I mean, of course, it takes all kinds. There are people who are lazy, and there are people who don't want to work, and there are people who are comfortable, at the level that they're at, and not working for more. And that's, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, people who are trying very hard to move up the social ladder, to move up the economic ladder, and who are unable to because of all of these varying factors that are being put in place by the system, systematic factors that are put in place. And then, this racism that sort of develops from that, which is, well, I did it, so can they. And that may not necessarily be true. So the next time you hear yourself saying it, or you hear someone else saying, I did it, so can they, I hope that you'll think back to this video, and then maybe you'll reconsider it, and maybe you'll even take the time to educate the other person on why that might not necessarily be the most accurate statement. And then hopefully we'll be able to, start a conversation and move forward and get to a place where stating that everyone has an opportunity and that everyone is on an equal playing field will actually be true. And hopefully we'll be able to get there. So thank you very much for your time, and have a wonderful evening.